so much, Michelle. It's such a great honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So I'm the founder of the Compassion Prison Project, and our mission is to transform prisons and communities with compassionate action. And our primary goal is to educate the public and the people living in prison and working in prison about their childhood trauma and what it does to the brain, body, and spirit.
I think that that's so very important. I don't think people really take the time to try to determine the reason why people ended up in prison. It wasn't like they just decided one day, I'm going to go to prison. There were some underlying circumstances that played a role in that aspect. Now, I know the first time I heard you, it was on Clubhouse. It was in one of the groups on Clubhouse. And you were actually talking in regards to another young man that is an ex-offender that was sharing his story of his journey to prison and what prison taught him. And he talked about, he ended up doing a TED Talk that spoke to what prison had taught him. So when you go into these facilities and when you work with these families, well, let's back up. How do you begin working with the families? How do you determine who your audience base is going to be or who your clients are going to be that you work with?
Well, it's really who will let me in the prison right now. With COVID, nobody's letting us in the prisons still. A couple of prisons are opening. I just was in Fresno, California, meeting with Valley State Prison officials, the warden and the deputy warden and a couple of the other staff. And I have an open invitation to work with those wonderful men. What happened initially is I volunteered at a prison, and when I walked in there, I noticed that what we were doing was backwards, because the people in there had done something very bad, but they'd also been treated very badly. And if we had gotten to them before and given them care before they got older, they probably wouldn't have committed the crimes that they did. And so I said to them, as I was introducing myself, I said, this isn't a prison, this is a trauma center. This is a place where we really need to heal the past, and so we can move on and do some great things in the future. And that was my sense. And honestly, after I visited prison for the first time, because I had been sold that people in prison were bad. That was what I had been sold. And, I was a little nervous going in there. But I walked out of there, I'm like, everybody needs to go into prison and meet these people, these beautiful, wonderful people. And let's stop what we're doing, which is based on, I think, a theory that, if you're bad, you need to be punished. But the thing is, we need to get to the root of what created this behavior, because it's really just behavior, and it's behavior that is unconscious behavior. When you get into the understanding of the brain science, what happens to the brain and body and spirit when it's traumatized. So the brain stem, it's the oldest part, it's the reptilian brain, right? This is the brain part where we go on instincts. The reptilian and the mammalian brain. These two parts of the brain, we sense danger before this part of the brain understands its danger. But if you're traumatized, you can't really differentiate if it's really danger or if it feels like danger. It might just be being in a classroom. But if someone's yelling and you have people in your house that are yelling, that feels like danger. So suddenly your alarm system, the amygdala, is going crazy. This part of the brain shuts down. Now, this part of the brain, this is your cortex. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is your cortex. And this is where we're human. This is the part of the brain that makes us human. This is the part of the brain that understands right from wrong, that understands good from bad, that understands consequences. This part doesn't know that if I kill this person, I'm going to go to prison. This part doesn't care. This part says, I got to stay alive right now. And so that distinction is, science understands this, but I don't think the general public really gets the true weight of what we're doing and that we haven't unpacked the brain science. And it isn't, so it ultimately doesn't come down to right from wrong. It becomes down from mental health and mental illness, or the well-being of this organism is not in shape. It should not be in places that are dangerous or threatening, or like for me, because so do you know what an adverse childhood experience is?
Yes, I do, but go ahead and explain it to our audience.
So there's a quiz created by Dr. Vincent Folletti and Dr. Robert Anda called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Quiz, also known as ACEs. And there are 10 ACEs. There's adverse, I'm sorry, I'm just a little flustered for some reason. There's physical abuse, there's mental abuse, emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect. There's a parent or caregiver mentally ill or suicidal or depressed, a caregiver or parent addicted to alcohol or street drugs, divorce or separation in the household, domestic violence, and a family member going to prison. So I have 8 of those. And I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And when I read that book, I realized that my behavior, the way I was responding to the world, was a result of my trauma. It had nothing to do with who I was. The fact that I couldn't deal with my son when he was crying, or when I was in traffic and people were honking at me, or when I got cut off and I'd blow a gasket, and my friends were like, why do you care? Why did he just cut you off? It's no big deal. And I'm like, yes, it is. I went crazy, but it was irrational. But it was very rational for this part of my brain. But if we look at our own behaviors, and if we look at our own childhood traumas or other traumas, it doesn't have to be in childhood, but this is the focus that I've done, that I'm looking at, is the childhood traumas, because when you're with someone who's supposed to take care of you and they hurt you, they beat you up, or they just, they continually slap you all throughout your childhood. That's a betrayal. That's a betrayal of our innocence, that we came in here, this glorious, innocent being, and suddenly the world isn't safe for us. But it's also a betrayal by living in a neighborhood that's dangerous. That's a betrayal, because then we're still in fight or flight. That's the thing. And we don't want to. When we're in fight or flight, we can't move on in our lives. So people say bootstraps, right? Why don't you pull yourself up by the bootstraps? When you're in fight or flight, you don't know what a bootstrap is. You don't even know, you don't care. And if you saw a bootstrap, you wouldn't know what it looked like, because you're focused on the threat, or what you perceive as a threat. And so when we talk about, building up communities and making people whole, we have to address the root problems and really start looking at what has damaged our sense of safety. If we don't feel safe, nothing's going to get done and nothing's going to shift. I don't care how many community meetings you have, we got to feel safe.
I think that that's important to understand the backstory of how people end up not only in prison, but find themselves in the same type of relationships that they promised themselves they would never get in because they saw it as a child. And so it begins to allow us to see that a lot of times, whether we think about it or not, the trauma that we have experienced through our lives has gave our consciousness a new point of view. Because now we're looking at things differently because of the trauma. If we never had the trauma, then that would not be any of the lenses that we would see the world through. So I want to go back to something that you said, because in what it was you were saying that you've gone into the prisons, you have worked with these young men. Have you worked with any women? Have you been in any of the female prisons?
I volunteered at a women's prison once, and just so you know, there's 95% of the people in prison are men. So there's not as many women prisons. But yes, to me, anyone who's incarcerated is my client. That's my sense. I just wanted to say one thing about, you said something about people go find relationships that are similar to what they experience as children. That's a reenactment of the trauma. And that's one of the symptoms of trauma and it's hard for the brain to differentiate. Once, like you said, we shift, our worldview shifts once we've been traumatized. And so we find ourselves in situations that are dangerous, that are violent, because that feels ironically safe to us. And we don't know, or it feels like love to us. And it feels familiar to us. So we put ourselves in situations, and I don't even know if it's definitely not a conscious decision to go to date someone who's not appropriate for you, or someone who's violent, or someone who's abusive, or who criticizes you. Those are things that we learned as children, which, I guess felt like love. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know all these details. I do know, though, that that's one of the symptoms of trauma, reenactment of the trauma. Like when someone has been sexually abused, sometimes they'll go and find people that abuse them sexually, or they'll, I have all these letters that just came through my mind, or they'll become prostitutes or pimps. It's the same thing, and so when we see, and then we condemn, like child predators or, child molesters, we condemn them, but we have to understand it's a compulsion. It's not something they really are conscious of. And it's something that they're driven to because it was done to them. And so while what their acts are heinous and horrifying to us, there has to be an element of compassion for them, and they have to stop what they're doing. Absolutely. But to make them such enemies in our society is and not giving them another chance is really, it's not understanding the full picture. You know what I'm saying? I don't condone that behavior. And it was one of the hardest parts in this process of, and I'm still working through it, is child molesters and serial killers. I don't understand it. But remember, the brain is not the brain like it was when it was born. That brain is different because of the trauma. And one of the guys wrote to me, he's in for sexual abuse. His stepfather raped him repeatedly, chained him, sodomized him, and had his friends come over and do this to him throughout his childhood. So that's what we're dealing with, like that kind of annihilation. And then we say, well, you're a bad person. It's like, well, what other reference of normalcy does this person have? Same with the man I wrote to on death row. He told me about his father who blew his brains out on his bed, on his childhood bed. And after living in chaos and abuse and, annihilation. And then of course he goes and does something horrifying. But is it worth the death penalty when this person had no other instructions on how to live? And through his life in prison, we just executed him during Trump's term. But through his incarceration, he learned to forgive himself, and he became a better person. And so it's like, at what point do we just assassinate this person the day they make the crime? Or because if they redeem themselves, who are we then? Who are we to assassinate somebody just like he did?
That's a very interesting point, because I know a lot of times, when you go through the court system and you do everything that is required of you, you get sentenced to prison, you do your prison term, you complete all the requirements that they had for you. Now you are, quote unquote, free to live your life as you see fit. But then you can't find a job. You can't find a place to live. Your credit is shot, and you're struggling to rebuild in that. And so what we find is a lot of people will reoffend, not because they necessarily want to go back to prison, but because they're not being able to meet their needs in any other way. So they go back to the familiar.
Well, and there's a few more points there. They've also been institutionalized. Their trauma hasn't been treated. So, and they've probably been heavily traumatized in the prison system. And remember, 95% of the people living in prison right now will be home at some point. And the question is, do you want them to recidivate, which means creating another crime, creating another victim, or do you want this person to be rehabilitated and a tax-paying citizen? I mean, if you ask me, I want a leader and a community organizer and a father or a mother that's ready to return to society and contribute. I don't want someone who's going to be homeless, literally homeless. A lot of the people that are unhoused are from prison. And I think this is a blind spot for us. And, you know, no shame, because I believe that we think we're doing the best that we can, but now we have more information. And I think with this information, it's really common sense to bring all of our tools of rehabilitation and programming and compassion and mental wellness to people in prison. Remember, they're the most vulnerable people in our society. When you do violence, acts of violence is the greatest act of vulnerability you can demonstrate, because for you to kill someone or for you to hurt someone means you don't feel safe. And so it's an ironic way to look at crime and violence, but, you know, we should be, I heard there's a tribe, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that, you know, when someone commits a crime in the tribe, they put that person in the center and they tell them how much they mean to him and the good things about him. And I think that orientation needs to be explored, because when we start showing people that they're valuable, they want to prove it to us too. And when we tell them they're pieces of crap, they want to show it to us too. You know, we get what we put out there. So that's my sense. And when I go to prison, I just see magnificence. I see possibility. I also see a lot of pain and suffering.
So how did you even come up with the entire compassion project? What spurred you into coming up with that? Was it that first volunteer time that you had, that you went in and started working with the men and you began to see where the need was, and then you created the organization?
Yeah, it wasn't that cut and dry. I just said I have to do something. And my friend who told me to read that book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, I said to him when I got out of there, I said, we got to get back into prison. We got to tell everyone that they're traumatized, and we got to help them figure out how to do this. And so I contacted the prison that I had just come from. One guy had given me his card, and I called him. I said, I want to do a program. I had no idea what I was doing. He says, well, let's do a pilot. And so I wrote a curriculum, which, you know, 3 years later, I know so much more. It's embarrassing what I came up with there and the way I would talk to them, but my intentions were pure. And so I think that's what they smelled. They saw somebody who really cared, didn't really know what she was doing, but really cared. So I walked in with that in mind. And, you know, now with COVID, I was really focused like on one-on-one interactions, which I still want to do. But what we did is we're creating a video series called Trauma Talks, and it's all about what all about their trauma, so that they can figure out how to heal this, how to recognize it, and also how to recognize when they're in their brainstem and when they're in their cortex. You know, this is huge for me too. So like, I'll be walking in the street and someone will just kind of touch me, and I'll say, you know, I'll just get offended or get pissed off. And now instead of just saying, who is this asshole? Now I'll just say, wow, you really had a strong reaction to that person. And that's because I was in my brainstem and I wasn't in my cortex. They pulled me right out. And I got really angry. I noticed the anger comes up immediately, and that's aggression. That's a symptom. That's not a symptom. That's a, oh, sorry about the dog.
Oh, you're fine.
But the aggression is how, sorry, they're just talking. Okay. So the aggression is what happens in the amygdala. The amygdala creates aggression in the body. And so I'm just like to see it in real time. And that's the thing. When you're in fight, when your body senses danger, you have like a quarter of a second to stop it, to stop the reaction and go kill somebody or go hurt somebody or yell at someone or whatever it is, that whatever aggressive behavior that you're going to get into, you have like a quarter of a second. So you have it's like you have to watch yourself. And that's the trick. And that's what I want to teach them and that's what mindfulness does. That's what tapping does, just getting into your body. And that's the other thing about trauma is we don't want to feel. We're living in our heads. We don't want to feel the body. I'm a workaholic, which is just as injurious. It doesn't, it's a deceptive addiction because, you get productive and you get rewarded for it, but it's still, I'm disconnected from my family. I'm still not feeling, and I'm still not living, a balanced life. So it's to be looked at and to be, I just took a nap today, which is, I wouldn't have done that a year ago. I would have been like, okay, let's just get some coffee and go through this. So, it's the awareness is it's the key here. And I want everyone in the United States, not just the people in prison, to really get this, that this is why we make bad decisions. This is why we can't save money, is because if we're stressed out, we're going to buy things we don't want or that we don't need, or especially if you're poor. Poor people don't know how to save because they don't have this part of their brain online. They don't know when their next meal's coming. So they go and buy something, they just spend money. I don't blame them. I've done that too. And so, it's that awareness that's so key for all of us to collectively be able to be in this part of our brain. We can negotiate, we can make good decisions. We can really see the other person as a human too. That's the other thing. The officers in prison, they're in fight or flight. So they don't see people in prison as human because they're a threat, right? And anything that's a threat, it gets dehumanized. But that's a tribal thing, right? So like a white person went to a tribe in Africa and they'd never seen a white person and they saw that person as a threat. And so biologically, we are attuned to preferring our own, what looks like us, right? So that's just a biological thing. That's not white supremacy. That's not racism. That's just how we are built. Doesn't matter what you look like. That's, I lived in Japan and they were racist against me, but I didn't look like them. So they didn't know how to, I lived there for 6 months and I felt like an outsider and I felt like, I felt less than. And it was interesting for me to experience that. I'm glad I did. But so that's something to also consider. And, but if we're here, we can see the human, we can see that that's just a human and not somebody who's a threat or somebody who's going to hurt us. And I have to train my brain every time I see an African-American that I don't know, that's something that I have to, or a Mexican man that, it's a man usually. I have to train my brain that, no, this is not a threat. This is a human. But in that fight or flight moment, there's a clench. So, but now I'm overriding that one. I'm beginning to say, oh, okay, look, that's a neighbor, or maybe they live nearby me. I don't know, but hi, and all is fine. And so that's my work that I'm doing, is working on my own internal implicit bias, is I guess what they call it. But that's my work. But when I walk into prison, I don't have an implicit bias. It's funny because I
You give yourself permission to be in that moment, and that's pretty much the difference. But you said that one of the things that you work with them on is the mindfulness exercises. So why don't you tell us exactly what is one of the mindfulness exercises that you utilize when you go into the prisons?
Well, actually, there's one that I really like right now, and it's called tapping, because it really puts you in the moment. You can go to the Tapping Solution. They have a great app, or just you can look up the points. But watch a video, because they tell you where to tap, and within like 4 minutes, you're out of this stressful feeling. You're kind of, it calms your nervous system. Just doing that a little bit helped me, just like, oh yeah. So it puts you back in your body. And the body, this is the thing about the body that we've cut off because we're traumatized. The body has so much more, has a lot of wisdom. Like the body knows, like, oh no, you shouldn't, don't take that, don't go to the store today, or don't make a left here for whatever reason. And I make a left there, and suddenly I'm in the right aisle at Costco, and there's some beautiful bowls that I want. But like, it's weird. As you get more familiar with your body, you get more in tune with what should happen. Another really great modality is somatic experiencing, and it's led with a practitioner. But those yucky feelings you have when you're traumatized, you don't want to feel them. But you don't want, really, the thing about it is you don't want to feel anything. When you're traumatized, you just want to stop the feelings. Okay, there's a feeling, I don't want to feel it. So somatic experiencing helps you differentiate from what's a yucky feeling to, oh yeah, that's a feeling, but that's okay. That's just a feeling. And so, but these things, unwrapping this trauma history takes time and patience and love and commitment. And just start watching our behavior. That's our, because, and without shame, and so like when I go and I eat a bag of potato chips and I'm just like, oh God, that's because I didn't want to feel, right? I just wanted, and it feels awful in my stomach and all those things, but no shame. That's the thing. We have to, because shame is coupled with trauma, and trauma in itself is an event, unless it's one of those natural disasters. But childhood trauma, what I'm talking about, are events that tell us that we're not okay, that we're not fundamentally good. And it's a shame. It brings shame to us, especially, when you're raped or something and you're immobilized, you can't move, you can't protect yourself. You leave with this horrifying shame. And that's what I want to say, is there's no shame in having been abused. It's a really important piece. But that process it's forgiveness. It's forgiveness for feeling the shame. It's forgiveness for the person who did it to us. If you can, I understand. But it's these levels of grace that are available to us once we stop, beating ourselves up, because it's a continuation. I think when we're shamed, we continue to shame ourselves. Like, oh, Fritzi, why did you eat those potato chips? Well, oh, Fritzi, I'm so sorry that you're feeling bad. I'm so sorry that you're unable to deal with this emotion that is coming up. It's such a different orientation to the same event. And that's what's available to us. But it's also slowing down. That's the other thing. I just stopped drinking coffee and sugar. I stopped eating sugar. It's been intense. But the two things are adrenaline. They create adrenaline in the body. And when you're traumatized, you want that. You want to be like alert. So it feels like a safe thing to do, drinking these substances, but they don't allow you to feel. And So I don't know what the prescription is for anybody, because I know when someone told me I had to get rid of coffee, I was like, no, that's my best friend. Literally, I felt like coffee was my best friend. And, but now I'm starting to feel the world more, and I'm actually taking naps, and I'm actually slowing down to experience my family. So, I can't tell anyone what to do, but, consider a couple of weeks without coffee, but do it slowly so you're not in a headache mode, and just see if you feel yourself more. I don't know, but it's this hypervigilance that keeps us out of our beautiful prefrontal cortex. It's a beautiful spot to be in.
So when you're working with the individuals that are in the prison, and let's say there's someone about to come home, how do you prepare the family, or do you interact with the family at all to kind of prepare them for the individual's return?
Well, the Compassion Prison Project is really focused on the people in prison, not the returning citizens. But we've had a couple experiences with people who are returning. One of the guys I worked with returned, and we hired him. And now he's off doing another job. He just got a raise and he got benefits. We don't have that available to him. We didn't have that available to him yet. We're not fully organized. We're organized, but not fully. But coming home is, when you're in prison, you probably make 15 choices a day. We're making thousands of choices today. Do I go to the kitchen? I'm going to go get something to eat. What should I eat? They don't have any of those choices. They can't go to the kitchen. They can't pick out what they're going to eat. So you come and you go into a supermarket. One guy had a panic attack because there were 16 mustards to pick. He had one mustard. And here's the other thing. This is institutionalization. Darnell, who's the guy we hired, he was waiting in bed for someone to open the door. I mean, he sat there waiting in bed for the day to start, basically, because that's what he's been doing for 12 years. So coming home isn't just about getting a job and getting your driver's license and a place to live. Coming home is just learning what it is to make a decision. Just learning that, and learning that people are much ruder in the real world. But also in California, we have, gangs in prisons. So you stay with your own race. So they have a built-in racism. They have a built-in racism system. So Darnell would walk around and he'd see a Mexican person, and, it would put him in fight or flight, because this is not part of his gang, and so he's had to adjust to a more integrated society, where we're not, where if you say something wrong, you could get jumped. Well, that could happen too, but not systematically like it is in prison. But returning home is, it's one thing we really want to work on and add to our organization, but it's not, we really need, our focus is getting people aware of ACEs and childhood trauma. We got to stay focused so we can really get this thing done. Because I really think once you know about this, you'll stop hating yourself. And that's like the first thing. That's the first step to the path to recovery, that you're not a bad person. You are keeping your body safe, and that's a biological imperative. That trumps everything. If you don't survive, there's no problems left. So, survival is survival of the fittest, but it should just be survival creates violence if you're in fight or flight. And we need to know this. And this isn't a liberal thing. This isn't a progressive thing. This is just facts about the brain, about biology. This is science.
I think that's important for individuals to begin to understand, because even that, even when I was younger, I would be that one that would, just like that, I would be gone. And in less than a second, I would be off. Someone say something off the wall. And I had to teach myself how not to do that, because it was not giving me the results that I wanted or that I needed in my life. I was being seen in a certain light, and I didn't want to be seen in that light. And it wasn't until I became aware of my behavior. Just because somebody else was telling me that that's what I was doing did not mean that I was recognizing it for myself.
Right.
So I had to come to a place to where I recognized it. There's a commercial that I remember seeing, and this is what really did it for me. There was this woman that was driving the car, and there was a child in the back seat, and she got cut off. And before the woman could go off, the kid went off in the back seat, just went off. And I looked at that, and it was almost like my kids, you know, seeing me go off, and I had to begin to change that thing. So even now, I don't even behave in that manner anymore. But if something happens and I'm with one of my kids, they'll be like, "No, mama, don't say nothing.
Right.
It's okay. Don't say nothing." And I'm thinking to myself, well, I had no plans in saying anything. But what it is they are remembering when there was a time when I would, and they are trying to protect themselves and keep me from embarrassing them. That's what they're thinking. Yes. And so I think that even though it's something that you're working on within the prisons with the men, it's also something that we need to look at for ourselves, because you said something very, very key. We have to learn how to give ourselves some grace. Yes. And society does not teach us that. Society teaches us to be the hamster on the wheel and to keep it going. That's right. But it's only when we take that moment to stop and recognize the life that we're living that we start understanding that we need to give ourselves some grace. My niece says it like this. She says, "I have to protect my peace at all costs."
That's a wise girl.
And so I was like, I like that. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that for myself. And so how I see the world now is that if something is transpiring, am I going to offer up my peace just so that I can get back at you? Or am I going to protect my peace at all costs and just let you go on and do whatever it is you feel like you need to do? And I'm going to go where I need to go to make sure Michelle is taken care of. And society doesn't teach us that. That is not what we're taught as children. That is not what society teaches us. And so the work that you are doing, I think, is fabulous. Just hearing you speak when I was on Clubhouse and I was in that particular group, it made me think, man, if I would have known you back when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and the much different life that I probably would have had, that I may have gotten this sooner than what I've gotten it. And so, but then God kind of reminds me, everything you went through was necessary for you to be who you are today. And so even though some of the choices and decisions that we make are not good ones, not to us and not to the people looking on, but it doesn't mean that it defines us. It means that we've got to get it together so that we can go back and share it with someone else to help them get it together, and they learn the tools so that they can thereby go back and do the exact same thing. And it keeps the cycle going. So first I want to say to you, thank you for the work that you are doing. Thank you. Because we don't think about it in the way that you have been describing it. We don't think about it like that.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why I'm really excited about the possibility of prisons, because when they heal, right? They understand about what their behavior, and they tell their families about the behavior that like, I'm sorry, I would hit you. I'm sorry. Then that family starts changing, right? And then those kids and that mom or whoever's in that family goes out into the community and they start healing. I mean, this could be huge. And I wish I had known me when I was in my 30s as well, because I had no idea what I was doing either. But that's the thing. And there's no shame. And Did you have any child abuse as a child?
I did not. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and I was a sickly child. So there was a lot of things that I was not allowed to do up under the pretense that they were protecting me. But what it created in me was resentment. And I felt like you were keeping me from doing something that I wanted to do. And so this story I told myself, it was all about the story I told myself that made it okay for me to feel like I was in this cocoon all by myself.
Mm.
And how to cope with being in that cocoon, because one of the hardest things for any kid is to look out your bedroom window and see other kids playing in the yard and you can't go and play.
Okay, so that's isolation, and that could be considered traumatizing. I mean, if you ask me, it's not an ace, it's not the top 10, but your inability. And did your parents leave you alone a lot, or were you?
Not necessarily. When I isolated myself. When I couldn't go and do what my siblings were doing, because I had just gotten out of the hospital with pneumonia, or I had had a major asthma attack, or, all of these other health issues that were going on. And back then, asthma was debilitating, considered a debilitating disease. Whereas today, it's like, okay, you need to operate more in your lung capacity. That wasn't what was taught when I was growing up. You need to be still, you need to not overexert yourself and all of that. And so I would get frustrated and I would hang out. I'm a daddy's girl, so I would hang out with my dad and he would love on me, but then you would get that for so long and then it would be like, you know what, I really want to be outside playing. And I would get a little attitude and stomp myself to my room, and I would write in my journal how much I hated my life, or, how much my mom and dad were being mean to me because they won't let me go outside and play. So it was really about the story that I told myself.
Yeah.
And how I separated myself because I allowed that to be my truth.
Yeah. Totally. Our stories are the only thing that holds us back, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we had no story, we could just zip through the world because we wouldn't have any thoughts about what's possible or not. We would know everything's possible, which it is.
Right.
And that's why I know I'm going to change the prison system, because I know it's possible.
And that's the key, being willing to try.
Exactly.
And I was always told, both of my parents, nothing beats a failure but a try. And you never know, once you try, you might like it, so you'll keep doing it.
It's beautiful. Beautiful words.
Yeah, so I commend you for the work that you're doing. I think that it is awesome that you are not going in with this judgment to make it seem as if these are horrible people, but going in with the mindset that let's begin working on your issues. Let's begin changing the story that you tell yourself. Let's give you another foundation on which to stand on.
Right. Well, who am I to judge, right? I did shenanigans just like they did. I didn't kill anyone, but I've sold drugs, and I was an accessory to a robbery. I mean, if I'd been caught, or if my mother's friend had prosecuted it, who knows? Who knows? Did you by any chance see Step Inside the Circle, the film that we did for the prisons?
I saw part of it. I didn't get to see the full thing, so I said that I was going to check it out.
Well, it's only 6 minutes, and that's one of the things I'd like to ask the audience, if they would watch Step Inside the Circle and share it with their friends if they find it moving or important. So, and then there's another film called Honor Yard to watch. So that would be great if that film was, it's only 6 minutes long, so it's not that long, but it was filmed at Lancaster Prison with 235 men in a circle. And for each step that they take, for each adverse childhood experience they take, they take a step inside the circle. And so it's a real demonstration of the amount of adversity that the men in this prison, but my sense is in all prisons, have experienced in their childhood. And it's a really, over 3 million people have seen it. So maybe you guys can make it even more. It'd be great.
You know, I think it's interesting that you say that. I participated in an event to where it was a bunch of young people. They had went to go see the movie about the 5 men or 6 men that got convicted for raping this woman, and they found out that they didn't do it.
Right.
And so when the movie came out, there was a viewing for this youth group. And so afterwards, there was a discussion. And what you said just brought back that discussion, because one of the things that the youth leaders got up and the question that they asked was this. They said, how many of you have a friend or a family member that has been murdered? Stand up.
Ooh.
And about 2/3 of the room stood up. And they told them to sit down. And they said, how many of you have a family member or a relative that's currently incarcerated? 3/4 of the room stood up. And they had them sit back down. And then they said, now you can answer this one or you don't have to, but how many of you have experienced abuse or witnessed abuse in your home or in a relationship in your lifetime? Every one of those young people stood up. And I bring that up for this reason, because if this is what we're talking about with youth starting at ages 11 and 12 all the way up to 17, then if we do not catch them at somewhere during this developmental process, then they're going to end up in the prison system. They're going to end up there because of the environment that is forming their concept of what the world stage is supposed to look like and how they are supposed to respond to it.
Right. And what they've been told is the way to respond is through violence. And the way they're programmed is they're going to respond if they feel threatened. They're going to respond with violence if they feel threatened. And that's what we all do. We all do that. That's built into us. And so that's why we have to, that's why cops, shoot at people running away, which it makes no sense. And we hate them for it. And that's a whole nother story, but it's still, he's in fight or flight. And so, but for me, it's like, I have the same compassion for people in prison as I do for officers who are out there. They're in fight or flight all the time. Same with the officers in the prison system. Same with the Navy SEALs. Same with the first responders. They're all in fight or flight. Navy SEALs have some training though. They have training. Officers in prison have training, but the thing about officers in prison, that's their day-to-day job. That's their job. Like when you go to Iraq, it's going to end. Your tour is going to end so you can recover. It never ends. And do you know the life expectancy of a correctional officer is 59 years old?
Wow.
That's right. And that presents as having 6 or more ACEs. So if you have 6 ACEs that are unaddressed, your life expectancy goes down by 20 years. My parents both died young. My mother died at 69. My dad died at 61. And they both, I know my mother had high ACEs. I don't know the extent of my father's abuse, but I'm sure he had some abuse because he was an alcoholic. And I'm betting it's 5 or 6 ACEs. So, that's the thing about ACEs. And this is what they discovered, is that the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the worse your health outcomes are as an adult. And you have more chance of cancer, lung disease, MS, autoimmune diseases, opioid abuse, and then domestic violence and the violence that you perpetrate on your families. And that's the thing, is we all don't want to do this. We don't. And but it's a compulsion because our bodies are, they think, so they see a child yelling or screaming and that's a threat. It makes no sense. But when my son is crying, I go wacko. I have to just, and it's irrational. And I'm like, why can't I be a good mother? Right? That's the question. Why can't I be a good mother and soothe my son? It's because I was never soothed. I didn't get those tools. I don't know how to self-soothe except through work or coffee, right? Other people have their own soothing mechanisms, but that's the thing. So again, back to no shame, but I do tell my son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm sorry I screamed when you dropped the peanut butter jar, which I did. I screamed, but what happened a couple of weeks ago? He broke a plate and he freaked out because he thought I was going to scream at him. He was bracing for an attack. I was like, oh, honey, are you okay? But that was the first time. That was the first time in the kitchen. The kitchen is a trauma zone for me. That to me is a place where, as a kid, it was a dangerous place because my mother had a knife and she would yell at me. So healing is possible, but awareness comes first. We have to be aware of what we're doing, but we don't want to hurt our babies. But even just a little slapping, and my mother would say, I'm slapping you because I want to keep you safe. Well, the irony is when you slap somebody, when you slap a little kid, they no longer ever feel safe. And that's what breaks my heart, is that parents are hurting their children thinking it's good for them. But what's really happening is they're creating an overactive and a hyperactive body now. The body's no longer able to maneuver through the world feeling safe and feeling at ease, feeling in grace. So we really have to re-examine. And I think a lot of what we did in slavery is, families that were slave owners are beating up their children because they would beat up their slaves. People that were slaves are hurting their children because they were hurt as slaves, and it's generational violence. My mother whipped me because she was whipped, and that's just, she would slap me. She wouldn't whip me, but she would slap me. I just want to be clear. I don't want to, but it sounded better. But she would hurt me because she was hurt. But this is what she learned, and this is how she could express herself. Well, the body expressed itself when frustrated. But no shame, Mom. I love you. I'm sorry. She's no longer with us, but no shame.
I think that's a wonderful message to close out on, is to remind ourselves no shame. Things happen. We've done things that we may not necessarily be proud of, but offer yourself some grace. Give yourself permission to step into an awareness zone so that your healing can take place. Because we can't heal what we're not aware of that needs to be healed. So the awareness must come in order for us to step into that zone. Fritzi, thank you so very much for coming on the show today. Thank you for walking us through that entire concept and construct of how the brain works. And it was ACEs, and what the 10
Yes.
ACEs are.
We have the ACE quiz on our website at compassionprisonproject.org. And also check out Step Inside the Circle again and share it, because it's a good film. And I think it starts the conversation about that we're we're all in that circle. And, together we can really heal.
Thank you again for being on our podcast. Is there any parting words that you want to say to our listening and our viewing audience?
Yes, my favorite quote, the quote I use all the time, it's from Mother Teresa. She says, if we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other.
Wow, that's powerful.
Well, we find the peace in ourselves. We forgive ourselves. We work on ourselves. And then that peace changes the world. That's what, you know, we all talk about change, but if we're violent in our heads, if we're violent to ourselves, the world isn't going to change. The world changes when you change, and that's on you. But I never realized that my wish to see the world different. It's all on me, and with me changing, my son's going to change, my husband's going to change, my dog's going to change, and then they're going to go out and do great things too. So it's all on us, but we belong to each other. So let's help each other do it.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks again for coming on to the show, everybody. This is your girl, Michelle, with Fritzi on Girls Talk Real Talk, because when girls talk, just about anything can happen.